I'm glad that you're here this evening. If you'll take a songbook and turn to number 601. Turn to 601. We're going to sing 601 for our song before the devotional thought. So go ahead and take a songbook. Open up to 601. After you've got your songbook open there, go ahead and take a Bible to 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2. Read a couple of verses from that chapter for our devotional thoughts tonight. 1 Peter chapter 2. And after some announcements, we'll head to our Bible classes. I'm glad we get the chance to do that together. Glad that you're here tonight. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Would you bow with me? Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. I thank you for the things that we've been able to do in it, the places we've been able to go, the things to accomplish, the people we've interacted with. Thank you for keeping us safe during this day, for allowing us to be here tonight. I thank you for each family that's here, for the decision that they made to be a part of our class time, our study together, the encouragement and the fellowship that we get from being here. Bless those that are here tonight by our time together. Bless them for that decision. Help us to be reinforced in the knowledge that this is where we need to be, where we should be. Thank you for the opportunities that we have to learn and to grow closer to you and to one another. There are many that we're thinking about tonight who are in the hospital or who are at home recovering or who are struggling with different things, and we do bring them to your mind and to ask for your guidance, your peace, your strength for them. Help us to be the kind of people that you want us to be. Help us to be that city set on a hill so that we can shine like stars in the night sky. Forgive us when we fail you and give us the strength to try again. And we offer this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
If you would, Mark, you can keep your finger there on 601. We'll sing that one in just a second as Brother Adam announced. But Mark 324. We'll sing this song as the invitation. 324. Alas, and did my Savior bleed. And then turn back to 601. We'll sing all three verses as this song, as many do, tell a story, but these three really coincide together. So let's sing the three verses of My God and I.
My God and I go in the fields together, we walk in God as good friends should and good. We clasp our hands, our voices sing with laughter. My God and I walk through the meadows good. We clasp our hands, our voices sing with laughter. My God
these opening verses from 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Put away all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander, and like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up into salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good. As you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God chosen and precious, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. There is a progression in these 5 or 6 verses that talks about the life that we live and what we are capable of doing, that I just wanted to briefly remind us of tonight. The first verse is about these negative things, and we come to our lives and we find that we have faults, we find that we have problems, we find that we have shortcomings, and the first thing that the Bible says we have to do is rid ourselves of those things. We have to empty ourselves of those things. That's a lifelong process for most of us, isn't it? But then the best that we can hope to do by ridding ourselves of all these bad things is to be empty. Is to be blank. Is to be what verse 2 says, a babe, a blank slate, tabula rasa. Having nothing, knowing nothing, being able to do nothing. But he says that from that state, we can then begin the process of growing. And so we begin as babes who can't do anything, but we grow up into salvation. And the process that I see that takes place here, first ridding ourselves of negative things, and then being able to start with a blank slate, and then growing into that maturity and that salvation. Think about the process of help. Think about the concept of help. And the 3 stages that all of us go through in our lives. It can be through different subjects and topics and situations. It can be over the course of our ordinary lives. We go through these 3 stages. But these are the 3 stages of growth when it comes to help every human being goes through. The first stage is help me. That's the first stage. As newborn babes, we need someone to come along and help us, because we can't do things on our own. We can't accomplish things by ourselves. But then, physically speaking, as children get a little bit older, they go into a new phase where they want to do things themselves. I can help myself. That's the second stage. I think as parents, we question where that stage happens, and if they really do know how to help themselves or not. We have to get to that point where we allow them to help themselves. But then the purpose, the goal, the point is eventually to get to the point where not only do we need someone to help me, and not only are we at the point where I can help myself, but now I'm at a place where I can help others. That's the stage of maturity. That's the final stage. I see all of those listed here in those few verses that we saw in this chapter. The negative things that we have to get rid of in our lives, that we need help to see their shortcomings, we need help to get better at. And then as newborn babes, we need someone to teach us. We need to taste and see that the Lord is good. But then in verse 4, when we come to Jesus, who is that living stone, what does it say in verse 5? We also as living stones are being built up as a spiritual house. We are growing. We are able to do things on our own. We become a holy priesthood, and then we are able to go outside to offer spiritual sacrifices, to do things that help other people. This is the process that we need to think about spiritually for ourselves, and the invitation is offered simply. Are you at the stage where you need others to help you? Are you at the stage where you're content to help yourself? Or have you gotten to the point where you can help others? And what can we do to help you take the next step? Tonight we'll sing an invitation song, And if you need help of any kind, we stand ready to assist you if you let us know what it is while we stand and while we sing.
Good to see everyone tonight. Hope you've had a good week so far. We appreciate you being here for our midweek Bible study. Hope you picked up an opportunity worksheet. I got several things I just want to highlight on here. Sunday, we will have our Glenwood adoption. So be sure and adopt one of those patients there. We appreciate those ladies that always take care of the sign-ups. Ladies Summit meeting is Sunday afternoon at 3:30. And then the next week, we'll be having an elders, deacons, preachers meeting at 3:30. Ladies, if you have not turned in your money yet for the Summit t-shirts, please be getting that to Autumn. I appreciate all of those that helped with the family that we were raising money for on Sunday. If you would still like to help with that, we're going to try to give that to them this Sunday. But if you'd like to help with that, please see one of the elders tonight or Sunday morning. And we'll take care of that. But gift cards, cash, whatever you want to do, and we'll get that to them. Also, we've got the Safe Place Family Holiday Adoption. If you'll see Caitlin Richardson in regards to that, Sisters in Stitches Project, Hams for Underwood, monetary donations for fruit baskets. We got a lot of different things, and we appreciate you all helping with that. Youth news. Courtney Patterson gave me this note. This 2-year-olds through 6th grade, y'all going to have a pop-up service project. There's a list of items right up front on the front pew. Sign up for what you want to bring. Bring items by this Sunday, and you'll have pizza and assemble them after the evening service. If you got any questions, please see Courtney in regards to that. Our teenagers, you'll be going to Top Golf Sunday night following our evening service, and then you'll be coming back to the building for a lock-in. And then the following Sunday night on the 28th, fellowship and pizza for all parents of our youth ages pre-K through 12th grade. The children and teens are invited too, but we especially want the parents for that, so please plan on being here for that. And then Danya Scott's going to be hosting a ladies' Christmas party December the 11th. So we'll have more to say about that, and she'll have a sign-up list on Sunday. Please see Sandra Montgomery's new address where she's moved. We're glad that Caitlin Creasy is doing better. She is at home. Paul Dodd is in the hospital. He's had a tough week, but they did get some bleeding stopped today. I guess they cauterized some blood vessels, so hopefully he's going to be doing better. Dwayne Fulmer's now at home. Virginia West, we want to continue to remember Keith's mother. She's at Mitchell Hollingsworth. Along with all the others that we have, please continue to remember them, send them cards, and give them a call. Anyone have any other announcements? Nothing else? Let's be dismissed to go to our classes.
Good evening. Good to see everybody. We're going to finish up David tonight because next Wednesday night we will be doing a Thanksgiving service on Wednesday night. So be thinking about what you're thankful for. And we got a bunch to be thankful for, and we need to every now and then designate a night or a day for thanksgiving to God for the things that he does for us. We left David over across in the east side of the Jordan River, up in some of the territory that was given to the tribe of Manasseh when they first moved into Canaan's land. He was up there running from his son Absalom. And Absalom does cross the Jordan River and go into Gilead, and they confront each other. In the 18th chapter of 2 Samuel, David divides his forces into 3 different units. One of them is, of course, assigned to Joab, who had been the chief of his army all the time. Joab is a nephew of his, and then the second part he gave to Abishai, who is Joab's brother, so that's another nephew that's running an army unit for David. And then there's a guy named Ittai, who was a Philistine, and he was from down in Philistia, Philistine, and he had come to David the day before Absalom decides that he's not going to be good to his father. He's going to rebel against him and be appointed king, and and fight with his daddy. And David gives Ittai a opportunity to return back to Philistines and leave him, and he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I gave you my word, and so I'm going to stay with you. And so he is obviously a valiant fighter. David must have known him from before when he was down in Gilgal, and when he was in Gath also. Should have known this fella. I think he did. Maybe I'm wrong. But he was down there with the Philistines, and David goes volunteers to the Philistines to go and fight Saul up in the area of Mount Gilboa, and they don't want him to go and send him back to Gilgal. And so, but this guy, evidently, I think David probably knew him. And he decides to stay with David, and he's a valiant fighter. And so David puts him in charge of a third of his army. Wow. When you start talking about armies and about how you position them and where you put them and all those kinds of things, a lot of stuff comes back flowing real quick to my memory. But you got to be careful where you put your troops and what they do and how they do. You don't want to be in mountainous territory with tanks because it's hard to get a hull defilade, one. Number two, it's hard to get a firing angle from if you're on a downslope. And so of course, they didn't have that kind of stuff, but you're not going to use chariots up in the mountains. I guess my familiarity with the mountains, I have been in the Alps, I have been in Romania and the mountains there. I've been out west in the mountains. I've been in the mountainous area of Vietnam. And so I have seen mountains and mountain fighting. But David has split those guys up to do and put them where he thinks he needs them. And if I had been him, I'd have done the same thing. I'd have put Joab where I thought the majority or the biggest portion of people were going to be for Absalom, to put my best in front of him. And that's probably what he did. In verse 4 of chapter 18 of 2 Samuel, verse 3, rather, he says, but the people answered, thou shalt not go forth, for if we flee away, they will not care for us. Neither if half of us die will they care for us. But now thou art worth 10,000 of us, therefore now it is better that thou succor us out of the city. So what the people are telling David is, don't go with us. We know you're a mighty warrior, or have been in the past, but at this point in time, it's about 985. So he has been, for roughly 26 years, the king. And he has fought, and he has had some problems, and they had to rescue him from another giant. It wasn't Goliath, but he had to be rescued from him. And so they said, stay in the city and provide us with provision. If you know anything about logistics and what has to be provided for soldiers in the field, it takes about 10 people in the rear to take care of one combat troop. You know, he has to be fed, has to be clothed, has to have ammunition, has to have fuel for moving. Remember the story of Patton's Third Army? He got mad because Eisenhower took the supplies away from him, particularly the fuel, and gave it to the Brits. And sort of made Patton mad, but anyway, they ran out of fuel and fought with no fuel for a day and a my uncle was in that Red Ball Express that refurbished refurbished the Third Army for Patton. And he said it was hard to keep up with them. They moved so fast. If you remember the story of the Bulge, Patton moved the Third Army from a battle, moved them to the left 100 miles, and put them directly into battle again, in the Battle of the Bulge. And that's the first time in the history of warfare in that time frame that an army had been moved that far, that quick, and put right back into battle. David's men and David's army is a good army, and they are capable of winning. They have worked on Saul, and now they're working on Absalom. Of course, Absalom, David tells the three commanders, tells Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, he tells them, don't harm Absalom. In other words, don't kill him. And that's David's son. And I can understand sonship, but I don't understand why the young man thought he ought to be king before his dad has passed away. Because if you look back at history in that time frame, I realize that David is the second king in Israel. But all around them, they had been used to seeing kings. If we go back to, roughly 1850 to 1900 BC, in the time of Abraham and in the time of Jacob, when they wind up in Egypt, what kind of government does Egypt have? They have a king, don't they? A Pharaoh. And that's what they knew from that time frame, that when they arrive in Egypt as guests there, and then turns into slavery there, they were there about 450 years before Moses comes along and God takes them out of there. And so they know what kingships look like. They've seen the Assyrian. They know the Babylonians are coming, but they don't realize who they're going to be and what's going to happen when the Babylonians come. But they know the major powers of their time frame. And so they know that a king reigns until he has a firstborn son or a son who is capable of doing that. Absalom is killed by Joab. And we've gone through that where he has the long hair, and evidently the hair, I think it was the hair that got hung up in the tree branches. Might not have been. Might have got his head stuck in a yoke-type branch on the tree. But anyway, he's hung up in the tree. His mule leaves him hanging there in the tree, and Joab comes and kills him hanging in that tree. In 1901, David is weeping and mourning over the death of Absalom, and I can understand that, and I'm sure you can too. He was one of the 6 sons that were born in Hebron. If you remember, David had 17 sons, 6 of them born in Hebron and 11 of them born in Jerusalem. And I can understand how he is sad about the death of his son. That's not the natural order of things, is it? Not the natural order of things that our children die before us. And so he mourns his death. However, Joab has to remind him, you have some soldiers that won the battle for you. You are reinstated as king. There is no doubt who's king. And you need to go out and encourage those troops. Well, the last thing you want as a winner of a battle is for the commander not to acknowledge that you have done your best. Okay? And I guess that's my big complaint about Vietnam. I spent 2 years over there. And we won every battle I was associated with, every one of them. There was no battle that we were ever in over there in the 2 years I was there that we lost. Not one. We could have ended that thing in 6 months or less had the politicians let us. And that sort of sticks in your craw, doesn't it? Now you look back at the World War II, and that's the last war we won. Okay? The United States has not won a war since 1945. And we've been in control of countries with our military, but we've pulled them out before there's a winning or a government set up that trusts us. And so, anyway, that's enough of my politics. I'll be quiet. But if you have a winner, you go and congratulate them on and make some awards for heroism, because I can't imagine having to fight with a two-edged sword. Okay, I can't imagine that that's my weapon, or a spear is my weapon. I can't imagine that. But anyway, that's what they fought with in those days. In chapter 19 of 2 Samuel, David leaves Mahanaim and heads back to Jerusalem. He's going back to the city of Jerusalem, and he's going back to the palace, and he's going back to what he knows. He's going back to where the tabernacle is set up. He's going back to the city that he's taken from the Jebusite. And he's led down to the Jordan River by a guy named Barzillai. And the guy's 80 years old. And I'll be quite honest about it. The last day I ran was July the 31st, 1987. That was my last day on active duty in the Army. I retired that day. We went to Helen, Georgia. We spent the weekend. I came back on Monday morning. I put on a flight suit and started being a flight instructor at Fort Rucker. But I made up my mind that day, if I couldn't talk my way out of it, they'd just have to whip me, because I wasn't going to run. I got enough running. When I was 47 years old, I had to run 2 miles faster then than I did when I was 24. And I'd had enough PT in the Army at that point. Anyway, Barzillai takes David to the Jordan River. He's the guy that fed him. When they first got to Mahanaim, Barzillai fed David and his people. And now he leads him back to the Jordan River, and David wants him to come to Jerusalem and live with him and stay there. And he says, I don't want to do that. I want to die where I live. And so he stays east of the Jordan in the area of Manasseh. Next portion that I want to look at is First Chronicles 22 through 28 and 1 Kings 1 and 2. What we're looking at is how do you transition from one leader to the next? And that's what we're going to look at is David's transition of the government of Israel to his son Solomon. And how do we pass our work on to the next group or the next bunch? The only idea I ever changed, when I changed places where we were serving, the only criteria I put on my own plate was, we're going to leave this place better than what we found it. It's going to be in a better condition when I leave than the condition it was in when I moved here. And it works pretty well. because what you do at that point is look and see what things are wrong that you can correct and put something better in place. David has had a rough time. You know, he spent several years, well, about 9 years running from Saul. And then he gets to be king, and he's down in Hebron, and it keeps going, and finally Saul is defeated, and he's anointed king over all of Israel. And that includes all of the tribes. And so he's had a pretty tough time. And then here comes Absalom. And not only was Absalom a problem, so was the Philistine. It took a long, long time. Finally, at the end of his kingship, there's not much going on between Israel and Philistines. They pretty much decimated them. And so the thing that's on his mind at this point in time with the peace that's going on is we've had the tabernacle in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah at the threshing floor of a guy named Onan. And he bought it from him, remember? And he's set the tabernacle up there. And he wants to build a building to house the Ark of the Covenant. And I don't know what the number of people are that are in Israel at that point in time, but we do have an estimate on what came out of Egypt. And some have it as high as 4 million and some around 2.5. But there were more than 1 million people that came out of Egypt to take Canaan's land. And if you look at that time frame, then it's 400 years down to King Saul. And so how many children were born and how many people were in the kingdom at that point in time? You could estimate that there's somewhere between 4 and 9 or 10 million people living in Israel that are under David. And so a temple would be, or a building to house this ark and institute the worship like it's supposed to be in the city of Jerusalem is a major point with David. And I can understand why. Because even when David does wrong, he is sorry for it. And the Bible calls him a man after God's own heart. And so when he makes a mistake, when he does something wrong, he knows he has to pay. And number two, he's sorry for it. And he writes several psalms about his problem with Bathsheba and what it has brought into his life. But he still loves the Lord and still wants to do what he can for him. David makes preparation for that. And when we look at what he did, as far as the stuff that he accumulates to build that temple and to furbish it and to organize it and the whole business, he spent a good portion of his time in the later years doing that. He collected all of the stuff for gold and silver and brass and iron and cedar from Lebanon and on for building a temple. He said, I live in a cedar house, and the God of Israel lives in a tent. And he wanted to do something about it. Well, God told him he couldn't do it. He says, you can't do that. I will not let you do that. You can't build it because you have blood on your hands. Well, he did. He was a great warrior, and one that was looking. In fact, in the early stages of his notoriety in Judah, they sang the song, Saul has killed his thousands and David has killed his 10,000. And that made Saul mad, didn't it? But anyway, he's been a great warrior, and he's now getting stuff together so that Solomon will have the stuff to build the temple. I didn't realize how pretty that temple had to be until I went to Russia and the Ukraine. I had never been in an area where there was the Eastern Orthodox Church, okay? If you go downtown Kyiv, you can stand on a hill and look across the river and see buildings over there, church buildings with gold domes on them. I'm talking about real gold. I'm not talking about something that they shine up every other week. It's real gold. If you go in there, inside the building, the area that's like here is big as this whole wide width of this room here. And from floor to ceiling is gold. And you know what the first thought went through my mind was when I walked in that place and when I saw that dome, the domes in Moscow and the domes in Kyiv. Why didn't the communists take those gold domes and all that gold in those buildings? Well, the reason they didn't, they'd had a major uprising, wouldn't they? The people over there would not have stood for that. That would have been the one thing that would have brought the communists down quicker than anything, was for them to come and take that stuff from the church buildings over there. So when he talks about gold this and gold that, and when they put the cherubim on the ark, it was gold, solid gold, one on each side pointing towards each other. And I said it, and I keep saying, I'll say it the rest of my life, which is not going to be that long, but I'm going to say it the rest of my life. The ark between the cherubim was the mercy seat, God's mercy seat. What was below that? It was a lid, right? And the seat was there between the cherubim on each end. What was inside the ark? Aaron's rod that budded, the 10 Commandments, and the manna. That's what was inside the ark. Now, whether that wasn't there when Jesus went to the temple, wasn't there. The ark disappeared somewhere in the 585, somewhere around there, BC time frame. But the covenant with God, the 10 Commandments of what you're going to follow, was inside the ark, and the mercy seats on top of it. What does that say? It says to me that God is a merciful, loving God, and He wants everybody. That's the only reason this place is still standing. He wants as many people as possible to come join Him and live with Him. And so that temple is something for them and for God. There's a most holy place in there. That's where God meets with the high priest once a year. Just once. Wow. We can talk to Him every day. Anytime, 24 hours a day. The next thing that David does is he organizes the temple people to do things. He takes the Levites and divides them according to the sons of Levi, and then he tasks the high priest with 4 things. Consecrate the most holy things, burn incense before the Lord, minister to God, and pronounce blessings in His name. Wow. You know, we're the most fortunate people that have ever lived on the face of the earth, and that's my opinion, because we can talk to God anytime. We don't have to go through anybody. And we have His Son standing there, His Son. He's mine. He's mine. That's my son. That's my daughter. They're mine. That didn't happen in this generation we're talking about, of David people, of the Israelites. They had a high priest. They had priests. And the Levites were broken down into, and they're the sons of Aaron, by the way, divided into 24 groups. In 1 Chronicles 24th chapter, where is it? Verse 10, I think. Yeah. Verse 10 is where he's breaking it down. And the one I've got marked in my Bible is verse 10 in chapter 24 of 1 Chronicles. It says the 7th goes to Hakosa and the 8th to Abijah. That's orders by number of when they served in the temple. To do what things? Light the incense, and I assume clean the holy area, not the most holy, but the holy area. Light the candlesticks, burn incense. Look after the priests, look after the high priest. Why is that? Why did I underline that in my Bible? If you want to find out when Jesus Christ was actually born, you got to go to Luke 1. And Luke 1 tells us about Luke's father. And let's see, verse 5. And there was in the days of Herod, the king of Judah, a certain priest named Zechariah of the course of Abijah. And his wife was the daughter of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. That's John the Baptist's father. And he's in the 8th course. On a yearly basis, they're the 8th ones. They serve 2 weeks at a time, and that's 8th order that serves in the temple. Okay, so that's 16 weeks into their year, isn't it? When he starts to serve. And we remember the story. The Lord comes, or the angel comes and tells him he's going to be the father. And what happens to him when he walks out of the temple? He couldn't speak. Couldn't speak. And he'd been told what the young man's name was going to be. It was going to be John. And everybody thought he was supposed to name it somebody that was in his family. And he comes out, and when the baby is born, they say, "What's his name?" He says, "John." That's when he spoke his first words after the encounter of finding out he's going to have a son. So that's the reason I underlined that 8th order in 24 of 1 Chronicles. David organizes the magicians and the gatekeepers and the treasurers and the officers and the judges for the temple and for the religion. You see, God's really in charge. He's got why do they have a king? Because they wanted to look like the nations round about them, be like them. Everybody else got a king, we want a king. Made God sort of half mad, didn't it? Yeah. He says, "You're rejecting me." He'd given them judges, and they took care of them. They took care of the enemy. When it got too tough, the judges came in and took care of it. And God appointed them and gave them powers to do so, both men and women that were judges. And then David organizes his government. Maybe I'm a little confused, but I would think he had some pretty good organization for his government when he was the king before this. I think he's setting it up so that Solomon can get on with the building of the temple when he first takes over. Maybe I'm wrong in that assumption. But he has officers in 24 sections, and if you look on some of the early maps that show the King Solomon's Israel, you'll see the areas that are set up, and it's sort of like the satraps when you look at them from the Cyrus the Great in the old Persian Empire. He has 24 officers that are going to answer to him throughout that territory. And then he appoints people as stewards over his property. I don't know how much property David as a king had, but he divided the property of Saul between Ziba and Mephibosheth. And then when he couldn't figure out whose line, he gave it all to Ziba, and then he redivided it after that. Because Ziba had told him Mephibosheth stays in Jerusalem so that he could reestablish Saul's kingdom as king. And I assume that David, because Ziba's the one that brought Mephibosheth to him to start with, I assume that David believed him at that point. And then when Mephibosheth shows up, after David gets back to Jerusalem, he tells him, no, the reason I didn't come is Ziba was supposed to bring me a mule or a donkey with a saddle, and I can't go anywhere because I'm lame. And so then he redivides the property. He establishes his cabinet. Those are the closest folks to him as a cabinet. They would take the reports, I assume, from these 24 section officers and come up with a plan. You know, the king is not going to have all the plan, is he? He's going to have some people that tell him, hey, we need to do so-and-so. Have you thought about this? Let's look at that. Same thing with our president. He has a cabinet that does those kinds of things for him. You know, the general of a division in the United States Army doesn't come up with all the plan. He has a staff that does that stuff for him. Anyway, David gives Solomon the plan or the blueprint for the temple. And he explains not only to Solomon, but to the people. He says, I wanted to build the temple, but God wouldn't let me because I have blood on my hands. But he wanted to do that, but he didn't get to. He did provide all of the necessary and abundance of materials for building that temple, and it obviously had to be a beautiful place. Had to be. A lot of silver, a lot of gold, cedar inside, you know, nice, beautiful place. But he urges all the people and his son to know God and to serve him and to seek him. And we know the history after that, don't we? That they didn't. And there was 40 kings in Israel and Judah total. In all kingships, there was 40 of them. How many of them were good kings? How many does the Bible say he's a good king? 80. 20%. 20% are good. That means 80% are bad. Hello? Hello? Humans get involved, and they can mess it up. After Solomon has been appointed as before he's anointed as king, and Adonijah, who is Absalom's younger brother, declares himself to be king. gets 50 men to ride in chariots in front of him and all that kind of stuff. And Joab and Abiathar join Adonijah. Those are defectors from David's kingdom. And they join Adonijah. And the way it gets found out, what Adonijah wants to do is he goes to his mother, or to, not his mother, goes to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and asks that he be allowed to marry Abishag, who is the wife of David, or a concubine of David. She's a young woman that has been brought in to help him in his old age. And Nathan finds out about it, Nathan the prophet, and he gets that killed pretty quick. And then basically Nathan and a couple others go and anoint Solomon as king. David has a final talk with him in 1 Kings, the 2nd chapter, with Solomon before he dies. David tells him to be strong, to keep God's commandments, and walk in his ways, and build the temple. That's good advice today, isn't it? Walk in his ways, obey his commands, and be strong. After this, Solomon has Joab and Adonijah killed. And then Solomon tells Shimei, who, remember, he's the guy that threw the rocks. When David's on the way out of Jerusalem, going across east, across the Jordan, this guy's up there throwing rocks at him. And he doesn't kill him. But Solomon tells him he can stay in the city and he'll be safe, but don't leave the city. Well, what does he do? 3 years later, he's chasing two servants that have left his house and leaves the city, and so Solomon has him killed. God's work requires organization and planning. Still does today. Organization and planning. God gives children to parents for a reason. Train them. And it's obvious that Adonijah and Absalom didn't get enough training. Anyway, that's all I have prepared. Have a good one. See you Sunday. Thank you.